So we've seen an overview of the language and we've already reviewed the history. This lecture is going to take a look at some of the actual code that you can write in JavaScript so that we can start exploring what the language looks like and how it operates. So comments in JavaScript actually work pretty much exactly as they do in Java. Single line comments are 2 forward slashes, and everything between 2 forward slashes and the end line is ignored. So the comments, the basic single line comments in JavaScript are actually exactly like Java. And you can also have multi-line comments in JavaScript. You use the forward slash and then an asterisk, and then anything that follows that up to asterisk forward slash is going to be a multi-line comment. So you can start writing on the same line. You can have a blank line. You can have many blank lines. This is a pretty common way to create comments. It's also a pretty common way to just remove sections of your code temporarily if you're testing or debugging your code. So these multi-line comments can work pretty effectively. And Java has these Java doc comments that would be started with a forward slash and 2 asterisks. That's a little bit less formal. It's not part of the language in JavaScript, though there are tools like JsDoc that do allow you to take some advantage of that approach. Functions in JavaScript are just declared with a function keyword. Now there are other ways to declare functions that we'll get into later in the semester, but generally speaking, you just type the function keyword and then the name of your function and then parentheses where you can have parameters, a curly brace, then the body of your function, and then a closing curly brace. So if we take a look at these, the first function, it's not returning anything, and there's no way to identify in the declaration this way that there is any return value. We could set a variable equal to the result of first function or to the result of second function, and one of those would have a value of undefined and one of those would have a value of 1. So if we take a look through these, the second function, it can return a value, and this returns 1 every time. Functions can take parameters. Now we don't declare those parameters as any specific type because we don't do that in JavaScript. So in the third function here, we have 3 parameters, A, B, and C, and that will return the sum, as a result of that function. The fourth function here, we can just put some out or create some output, and this is going to show you the arguments array. This arguments array just exists within your function, and it represents each one of these values. So in the third function, if you had an argument, if you use the arguments array, argument 0 would be A, arguments 1 would be B, and arguments 2 would be C. So it just corresponds to those parameters in order. There is unlimited whitespace available in JavaScript. It doesn't actually have any meaning. It's all compressed when you actually run your code. So each one of these statements is totally fine. Blank lines are fine. All of the logic is organized by these curly braces. So however you like to format your code, blank space in between your variables, in between your keywords, in between your semicolons, that's all okay in JavaScript. Numeric operations, they follow the normal order of operations. So you start off with things enclosed in parentheses, and then multiplication and division first from left to right, and then addition and subtraction from left to right. And the symbols here are pretty much exactly what you would expect based on what we've seen in other languages. Plus minus the asterisk for multiplication, the forward slash for division, and the modulo operator is the percent symbol. Just like we've seen in Python and just like you might be familiar with in Java. The modulo operation just gives you the remainder, and division in JavaScript is going to be floating point division. As far as the operators that we use, you can kind of see how they all work here. 3 plus 3 is going to be 6, 9 minus 4 is going to be 5, 7 times 6 is going to be 42, and 9 divided by 4 is going to be 2.25. So you kind of get that floating point division there. And then the last value here, math.floor, will get 2. So you kind of have to use math.floor explicitly to get to integer sort of division. As far as Boolean evaluation, we have the same operators that are available in Java. All of these are legal. You have greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, not equal to, and then you have and, or, and not. And there are a few more of these that we'll get into in future discussions because JavaScript has this sort of weak typing, we actually need a few more operators to think about whether or not two variables are sort of equal, or if they're equal in both the type and in the value. So JavaScript will, using these operators, using two equal signs, JavaScript will sort of force evaluate those based on data type. So if you have a string that is 0 and then the value 0 itself, those will actually be equal in JavaScript because it's going to kind of try to get those to the right data type for comparison. So Boolean operators, you can see an example of each one of these. And if you take a look at these slides, there are links to JsFiddle, which will just give you a way to execute these very easily. So you can copy and paste this, or you can go directly to the JsFiddle and you can run the code there. We'll take a look at that in a future lecture. But you can see this is going to allow us to output different values. And if we move down to the bottom, you can see this additional operator that I just alluded to, this triple equals sign. So this is equivalence in value and type. So this first 3 equals 3, that's going to be true because JavaScript is going to evaluate those types in a way that will allow them to be compared with each other. So to actually compare on value and type, you need to use all 3 of those equal signs. Escape characters work very similarly in JavaScript as they do in Java and Python. You can put single quotes into a double quoted string, and you can put double quotes into a single quoted string, but you can't necessarily put double quotes into a double quoted string, and you can't add new lines or tabs. So you use the backslash character to put those in. So /t is going to be your tab, /n is going to be your end line, and you can also break lines using a backslash within a string in JavaScript. So a backslash and then an actual end line will allow that string to continue on to the next line. In JavaScript, we do have strings, and the strings are actually kind of similar to what you might see in Java. The API for strings is remarkably similar to the Java API for strings. And this is where you can use things like index of and last index of to find things in the string. You can use a substring, which in Java works the same way as substring, and it's similar to Python's ability to use slices. The parameters there do correspond to the beginning and end slice values that you would use in Python. You can use 2 uppercase and 2 lowercase, and you can find characters in a string. Now, the interesting thing about JavaScript is it doesn't actually have a character value, so char at actually would return a string, and if you need the actual number, the character values, you use char code at, and that will allow you to evaluate what individual characters are in a string. So here's a couple of examples on how you might work with strings. Note the var keyword. In JavaScript, you can declare variables a few different ways. You can use let, which is really the appropriate way to declare variables. Some of this has been copied from other slides. So there's actually 2 mistakes on that first line. Var s equals abc. That actually, we would typically use let, and we'd also end that with a semicolon. So that's not quite perfect. But you can see we're going to log the length. We can log what character is at position 12 and get different substrings. So again, you can take a look at the JsFiddle to actually operate these. As far as numbers, some operations in numbers won't work. For example, if you try to divide a number by a string, you're going to get an NaN, which is not a number. You can use that in calculations, probably not super useful, but there is an NaN value, and there's also an infinity value, so those can both be used in mathematical operations. And then everything in JavaScript is an object of some sort. So numbers have methods. You can convert a number to a string using toString, and you can convert a number to a particular set of decimal places using toFixed. So you have a couple of different abilities to modify your numbers using them just like objects. And then other functions can be useful for getting numbers from your code. So like in Java, you would have a integer.parseInt. In JavaScript, it's just a function. It's just parseInt. Similarly, in Java, you'd have float.parseFloat. In JavaScript, it's just parseFloat. You just use that as a normal function. You also have some capabilities within the math object. So you can use math.round, math.pal, math.square-root, sine, cosine, tangent. You can create random values, and you can create absolute values all from math, very similar to what you might do in Java. So if you're familiar with the math object in Java, you'd find that it works very similarly to JavaScript. In variables, with variables, we have a few different ways we can declare those. As said before, you can use var, V-A-R, which I believe is short for variable. Nobody's ever told me differently. And var num equals 4 basically creates a variable and assigns the value 4 to it. But typically we declare let, declare variables using let. And what let allows us to do is it checks to see if that variable has already been declared. And that's actually really important if you're writing a lot of JavaScript code, because it prevents you from overwriting the value of a previously used variable. So if we're using var variables, that checking doesn't actually happen. But if we were to use, or if we were to uncomment this line here, let num equal 5.0, what would actually happen is you get an error saying that that variable has already been declared. And if you don't declare a variable, if you don't use anything in front of the variable, you end up with a global variable. So if we just start using a variable without declaring it with var or let or const, which is another keyword that we can use to create constants, then you actually get a global variable that way. As far as types, we do have a type of function that will tell us the types of our different variables. So we have Boolean variables, we have number variables, we have string variables, and we have obviously null object values as well. But there is also an instance of function or keyword, just like in Java, but in JavaScript, we probably won't use instance of nearly as much. It will have a little bit more limited value based on the objects that we'll tend to use in JavaScript. But if you've used Java a lot, you're familiar with this instance of operator, which you can use in JavaScript in different ways. Now we have if-else statements. Again, very similar to what you might see in Java. The only difference is that often you will see the triple equal sign in order to evaluate the equivalence between two variables. But you can use or, two pipes to evaluate x or y, and you can use ampersands, x and y. But all of these two sides will do the same thing. So you have an if and else. Again, just like Java. So if a is equal to 40 or a is less than 15, and then we have the opposite there. So we can combine these using an if and else, which is probably cleaner and a little bit easier to follow. You can also chain multiple if-else statements together, so this works exactly like in Java as well. In Python, we had to use the elif keyword when we started chaining else-if statements together, but here in JavaScript we can just use else-if, and we can do this for as many as we need, and then we can end that with an else if necessary, or you can end it with one of the else-if statements. Now, as far as examples of if statements, they can be nested. So in this example, we're going to create a couple of variables. We can prompt the user for a number, and then we can evaluate that input in a couple of different ways. And you can see we can kind of evaluate this based on sizes, but we can nest these statements together. And you can also use else if to evaluate these statements. So again, you can take a look at this. You can plug this into JsFiddle, and you can run it for yourself. And you can click on the link below in the slide notes so that you can actually get directly to that without having to enter it. And that's a rough overview of the very basic syntax in JavaScript. This will show you how to write functions, how to declare variables, and how to evaluate things with if-else statements. So that should get you started. In the future lectures, we're going to get into loops, we're going to get into objects, and then we'll start working with JavaScript in the browser, showing some of the things that we can do to manipulate the browser view and the document object model. Thanks for watching.